Something that God has been doing with me as I've been waiting for him to fulfill these promises, and he's building my faith and he's drawing my attention where it needs to go, because I don't know where my attention needs to go. I'm just dumb. I need him to build me. I need him to do what he knows is good. So one of the things he's been doing is drawing my attention. He has been building me and he has been drawing my attention to where it needs to go. And one of the places that he's been drawing my attention to are the things that he's done, the things he's already done, the things he's already revealed, the ways that he's already been glorified. And he was making me realize something tonight. And I think I've mentioned it, but tonight he was really showing it to me. You know, the assembly was discerning what we should do in terms of as far as meat went. Because we realized that in Acts, it says that you're not supposed to eat the blood of the animal. And as you go into the law, you start to realize there's a certain way that the animals were supposed to be sacrificed. And all of the blood was supposed to be drained right away. You weren't supposed to wait or let the meat sit in the blood. And as a matter of fact, if you don't do it that way, the blood will actually go into different parts of the body. You won't be able to fully drain the blood out of the animal. And we had taken this trip. My son-in-law, my grandson, and my daughter had taken a trip up north to go to a wedding. And the day of the wedding, God woke me up and he said, the bride has no regard for the bridegroom. And he was not talking about the bride and bridegroom that, I knew that he wasn't talking about them. But those were the words that he said to me just before I woke up. And later that day, we found out as we were driving home, my daughter went to check the news because we hadn't really checked anything all throughout the day. We'd been busy, with the wedding and it was a Sabbath. And so we had Sabbath assembly in the morning and then we headed out for the wedding. So we hadn't really checked anything. But that day, as we were driving home, my daughter was checking the news and we learned about the Hamas attack. And as we were driving, my son-in-law and my daughter became very upset about the cows in the field because we stopped in a town to have a restroom break and the smell was just horrific. And it's not the smell, that is not the smell of a normal pasture. That's a different smell. Like that's a smell of suffering. That's a smell of not being taken care of. Those animals are not being cared for properly, and they were so upset about it. And then Jeremiah got sick from eating eggs, and rather than go to doctors, and rather than call this an allergy, and rather than do all the stupid things that the world does, they went to the Word. And they discovered that there is a command still for Gentile believers. There is a command that we are not supposed to eat animals that are sitting in their own blood, that we are to abstain from that. And so my daughter brought it to the next assembly. A week from that date, she brought that to the assembly. She had been talking to me about it, and then she brought it to the assembly. And she said, I think we need to discern this as a body, what we're supposed to be eating, where we're supposed to be shopping. And so that started a whole thing. Now, here's what God was showing me tonight is that attack happened in Israel, but that's not where God spoke truth to us. He presented us with another situation in order to discern where we should be shopping. And we came to the conclusion as a body that we didn't feel comfortable shopping in a kosher market. And you know why? Because there have been so many additions to the scroll by Reformed Judaism that we did not feel comfortable partaking in all of those additions to the scroll. We felt more comfortable going to a halal market because as each of us was studying and each of us was discerning, we discovered the commitment, the obedience, and the dedication to preserving certain practices and certain practices that are in accordance with what God has commanded. And so that was very interesting because it wasn't like we looked at this situation, we were like, oh, let's pick a side. He directed our attention to something totally different while concurrently presenting this other situation. So we had actually discerned that before ever coming to the conclusions that he brought us to with regard to what's going on in the Middle East right now. That was just so interesting. And now, I'm really not on social media, but I've come across something that interested me, and it seems, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like what's happening on social media, because I came across a YouTube video of different testimonies of those who grew up in what they probably would not have identified as Reform Judaism, but it is Reform Judaism. Those who went to Hebrew school and they were being indoctrinated with this propaganda, the Zionist propaganda. And so it looks like what's happening on social media is there's some movement maybe that's being called like, what about Palestine? Because I heard that term kind of thrown around a little bit and it sounded like maybe that was the title of the movement. I don't know. In any event, it sounds like there are a lot of people who part of what the testimonies were about is, when did you realize that you'd been sold a lie? So there are all these ethnically Jewish people, some who, went to Hebrew school, some who were like kind of lightly introduced to it, but they were talking about this propaganda that they had grown up with, and it never occurred to them that this was wrong, that Palestinian land was being taken away and people were being raided in the middle of the night, their children stolen and arrested, and all of these crazy things that the IDF has been doing. And he started to make me realize, my goodness, this is a big thing that he is revealing right now. And he did it with our body in a totally different way. Like, he led us into truth. It wasn't like, just go pick a side. And I want to tell you something. The one person who wasn't doing that with us, who didn't show up to discern regarding the meat, regarding, didn't follow the process that God had brought us through, she was led astray. She was led into this whole counterfeit Christian idea that you support Israel at all costs. Doesn't matter if they're murdering little children. I mean, that's just stupidity to me. If you ask me, that is absolute stupidity. How do you come to that conclusion? Like, how are you so wicked and dull that you would think that it's okay? Never mind everything else that Jesus has said. Never mind everything else in the Bible, but that it's okay to go and do stuff like this to little children, to torment them and their families for 75 years plus, on the basis of what? Because this group needed a place to go to. So they distorted scripture. This group, by the way, that came out of Europe, that had been through the Holocaust. And why had they been through the Holocaust? I'm going to tell you exactly why. I wrote about it in A Soul Aligned a long time ago. Before all of this happened, God had already talked to me about it. These people who were living in Germany, living in Europe, were reforming God's word in a movement that in German is called Wissenschaft des Judentums. It means the science of Judaism. God was talking to me about science. He was talking to me about these things long before they even happened, guys. In 2019, he had me writing about this. That movement, Wissenschaft des Judentums, means the science of Judaism. So essentially, they joined quote-unquote Judaism, false Judaism, with the Antichrist field. The field that denies that there is a creator, who is Christ, by the way. That inherently means it's Antichrist. So they attempted to join God with the Antichrist, with the devil. That's what they did in Europe. And you can look at it through history, and feel free while you're doing that to read Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 regarding what God will do if you do things like that. And so it should not surprise you that he sent the Holocaust. He has also had me talking about what happens when you don't return to God, and you don't deal with the things that God has sent you, and you continue to have unresolved suffering called trauma in the world. That thing that they say, oh, you're just going to have it for the rest of your life. Not in God, you're not. If you return to him and you find out the reason he sent those things in order to be built, you're not going to have that the rest of your life. You might remember it the rest of your life, but you're not going to have syndromes like PTSD, a spirit of fear, for the rest of your life. You will have returned to God, and you will have been restored and made whole in him. But see, that's not what happened. This is what happened. They set up their first synagogues and universities in Europe. That is why God sent that destruction on them. And so then they needed a place to go. They needed a place to go so that they would never have to go through that again. What have I talked with you about? When you don't resolve your trauma, you become a victim or you become a perpetrator, sometimes oscillating between the two, depending on the situation. And so they are doing the very same things that were done to them. They are continuing that behavior that was done to them, perpetrating onto innocent people. There was no reason why anyone should have been treating Palestinians this way. There was no reason for that hostility. Jews had lived with Palestinians for many, many thousands of years with no problem. Now, who are the key players, guys? Who are the key players that I tell you about in Bible study in these videos? Europe, United States, counterfeit religion, Catholic Church. And who's supporting all of this? Who supported the Balfour Declaration? Well, the British mandate over Palestine ended in 1948. So Britain stole Palestine and gave it to Zionists in the Balfour Declaration of 1917. And there became this identity, this counterfeit Jewish identity of Zionism and Ashkenazi Jews. What does that mean? It means Jews of Germania. It's Yiddish for Jews of Germania. Well, that's not the heritage of Jews. The heritage of Jews are Jews Jews come from Israel. Jews have come from Egypt. You see that in the Bible, don't you? Jews have come from all over. So what are the Jews of Germania? They're Reformed Jews. Those who reformed God's word in order to join him with the devil. And so in 1967, the Six-Day War began. This is also known as the 1967 War to Arabs. And that rerouted Israel's landscape. And that's when Israel became the preeminent military power. And so for that reason and others, Israel's destroyed the possibility of a two-state solution. There can only be a one-state solution. You have to have a democratic state in which all are equal, but they refuse to do it. What's compelling them? Well, I've told you that when you do not deal with what God has sent and you don't return to him and you don't heal in him, you end up compelled. You end up with a chink in your armor, and the devil slithers into that, and he starts jacking you up and causing you to behave outside of your integrity. You become a tool of the enemy. This is what gives him a license to do business through you. Is this something am I speaking, a foreign language to you? It should be obvious. People who are abused usually end up abusing others or end up in a victim situation unless they heal. Is that something you're not able to observe? Because one of the things that I find is that people are so quick to go to therapy and go to pagan disciplines like medicine. But the minute I start speaking common sense, they call it psychobabble. Psychology doesn't own this. This is something you can easily observe. And then they start saying, oh, you're being extra biblical. No, I'm not. This is basic common sense. This is something that you can observe and that you've probably talked about. Do you not explain or describe your internal experience as a result of your lived experience? So when I tell you that you need to heal certain things from your childhood in order to be able to have a correct relationship with God, or you're going to start projecting that stuff onto God, is that psychobabble? Of course it's not. That should be common sense. You know that if you're having difficulty having a relationship with God and you keep attributing, the report card God or a damning God, or you can't connect with God, you know that there are connections between your relationships with your parents or your primary caregivers and the things that you're experiencing with God. That is common sense. But unfortunately, the very people who are so quick to run to medicine and pagan disciplines and to step outside of the Bible accuse me of being extra biblical when that's extra biblical, guys. You want to go to a scientific discipline to ask them what's going on with you instead of going to God, instead of going to his word, instead of trying to understand based on his truth. We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some things that psychology has observed, and that's all they are. They're just observations. That doesn't mean that they own that. Where psychology diverges from truth is where they start to make their own explanations about why those things are so. If they observe that those who have been abused and don't heal go on to then abuse or be in victimized situations, then that's just an observation. Then you have to test that and see, is that right with your own experience? Yeah, that's right with my own experience. I've seen it in the people I've worked with. I've seen it in my own life. It's basic sense. God gave you sense. I mean, most of us anyway. Some of us, I don't know. There's a certain level of sense he's given us. We should be able to test that. And then we go to God and we ask him, okay, so is this so? And if it's so, then why? And I've told you why. Because that is a chink. It becomes a chink in your armor. A place in which the devil is able to slither in. Why? The only reason he's able to slither in is because of your sin, because you've succumbed to something else, like you went and served an idol, or you're lukewarm, you're unoccupied, you're unresolved. Why in this particular situation of being unresolved would he do that? Because you have spurned his ministry and you have not returned to him for healing. And that's what's happening in these people, these Zionists. That is what's happening with them. That's why they're doing this. They are compelled to do this because they have not healed. And they do not believe in God. Because if you believe in God, first of all, you don't go to war. Old Testament, people went to war. They were sent into land to go possess the land. But there came a point, but even in that, even when they possessed the land and there were foreigners living among them, God was the only one who ever told them when they could do that and to whom they could do that. And there were foreigners living in the land who they were not allowed to oppress, but rather were required to bless. Don't glean to the edge of your field when you go to harvest, but leave that there for the foreigner who resides among you. God never said, he never painted this picture of the elitist chosen people. As a matter of fact, it's his humble chosen people, his weak chosen people, his people who are, when they are being sued, give you their cloak as well. When you ask of them, they give to you, who pray for you when you harm them and bless you when you curse them. Those are his people. I don't know what this is. I don't know what the heck is going on here. At least as far as God's people are concerned, those are not God's people. God's people do not behave this way. So those Ashkenazi Jews invaded Palestine in 1948, and Jewish nationalism, Zionism, systematically took over Palestine. This is called the Nakba. I think that's what Arabs refer to it as, the Nakba. And at that time, the Jewish state of Israel was established and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine began. So let's talk about the key players. What was the role of Britain in Palestine at that time? Well, as I told you, the British mandate over Palestine ended in 1948. But in 1917, Britain gave Palestine to Zionists in the Balfour Declaration. And you see what's going on right now. You have seen the blind support of counterfeit Christianity, that Christian nationalism that rose here in the United States. You've seen that. You've seen their blind support of Israel. I mean, for no good reason. So both of Christian Zionists and so-called Christian Zionists, right? And so-called Christian America and so-called Christian Europe, you couldn't get the UN to even act on this. What took them so long? Israel has violated international law. Russia, Putin, is supporting Palestinians, taking them into Russia. Where's the United States? Where are the Christians, guys? Where's our faith and where's our obedience to what God has actually established? So what's God doing right now? I mean, he is just laying this out. Everything that has been done in the earth being laid bare right now. And I can't help but think that there is such a symbolism and a mirroring of the violent takeover that's been done to Christianity. Absolute violent takeover. Catholics killing Protestants, Protestants killing Christians. You know me, I do not conflate Christian with Catholic. They are not the same thing, and I do not conflate Christian with Protestant. Christians worship God in the Spirit and in truth. Protestants worship men, and so do Catholics. They are concerned about men's doctrines and prostituting themselves to the world, being like the world. They don't want anything to do with being a nation set apart to God. Christians do that. They are suffering for the name, and they have suffered at the hands of both Catholics and Protestants, a violent takeover of God's church. There's such a mirroring of that with these Ashkenazi Jews, these Reform Jews, counterfeit, fake Jews, claiming to be religious. They have no concern for religion whatsoever, or they wouldn't have reformed God's word. They wouldn't have tried to join him to the devil. So you see that mirroring of them coming into that land and just like trying to violently take over. No, this is ours. This is an incredible scheme of the devil. You should be able to recognize it. We're described as land. Do you see that they came in and took over the land, killing, massacring all believers, trying to take that for themselves? That's exactly what the devil does, and that's what he did in Christianity. Such a mirroring. So we should be looking at this situation and understanding what God is revealing to us. And so what has resulted in this is the apartheid state of Israel, Jewish supremacy regime in which one ethnic group is dominating another. Even though God has said you're not to oppress the innocent, it's unbelievable what these people are doing. But it's also not without, it should not surprise us that he speaks in these kinds of ways regarding worthless shepherds who come and murder his children. A satanic group that is dominating the other, oppressing the other. And the crazy thing is that Christians are supporting something that is so clearly unjust, that is so clearly racist. They love to throw that around, right? They love to throw that language around and say that, oh, this is anti-Semitism towards Israel. Excuse me, Israel is committing genocide according to race. They're the ones who came in and said, no, our race is going to reside here and you're out, stealing their land, killing their people based on what? A justification that God gave them permission to do this? I don't think so. Netanyahu just got done citing the Amalekites. Netanyahu, you know, the guy that claims to be an atheist but uses the Bible when it's convenient for him. Jesus came in the New Testament and brought the command to love, guys. And then he defined the command. You are not allowed to go to war. You're not allowed to do that. I was having a conversation with someone earlier who was asking me, is it a sin to go to war? Is it a sin to, go into the military? Well, what do you know happens in the military, guys? You get brainwashed according to propaganda and ideology. You come back with PTSD. You know, what the world calls PTSD, that set of symptoms that is very literally a spirit of the devil, the spirit of fear. And that's the curse. That's the curse that you've called on yourself for doing something that God did not tell you to do in the name of what? Patriotism? God didn't tell you to do that. I come from a large military family. They're not going to like what I say if they ever even bother to listen to it. But that is not what God told you to do. He didn't tell you to go to war. In fact, when Jesus was captured and he was having that discussion with Pilate, what did he say to Pilate? Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said, you've said so. And he says, so where's your kingdom? And Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my people would fight. So what gives any of us the right to go and think that we can fight and oppress another group? What happened in the Old Testament happened so that we can understand certain concepts like being a nation set apart from other nations. So that we can understand the punishment due the wicked in the end of the age. But this is a spiritual punishment. It's not a physical one. If we hadn't understood the physical, we would not understand the spiritual. But as it is, this is no longer permitted. This is not permitted, period. Christians were being slaughtered in the New Testament. Paul talked about it. Sawed in half, fed to wild animals, burned at the stake, slaughtered. Did they go to war? Yeah, I didn't think so. So why is Christianity supporting this? Why is Christian Zionism supporting this? Why is there even a faction called Christian Zionism? But I will tell you one thing. This is a brilliant way in which God is separating the wheat from the tares. Anyone who supports that blindly does not have a brain in their head, and they definitely don't have God in their heart. You cannot have truth in you or God in you and behave that way. You cannot support that. and say that you know God. There is no way. Please discern the things I've said with God.